Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 27th of March 2015, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host this afternoon, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson, and behind the very large technical desk is Nick Green. Well, the weather in Plymouth is a bit cold, a bit overcast, a bit gloomy, but of course not as bad as north of the border. And we have this shocking picture of snow, which has fallen in Aberdeen. And as a UK column exclusive today, this cold snap in the Aberdeen area has been caused, according to the Daily Telegraph, by those naughty beavers and squirrels in Siberia. So if you're a sheep there on the highlands and you're feeling a bit miffed today, I suggest you get an email off to your beaver and squirrel cousins in Siberia. If you doubt what we're saying, get on Google and have a look at that extraordinary Telegraph article, which is supposed to be science. Well, happy birthday today to this gentleman, Robert Greene, who has campaigned so long and so hard to protect children, not only in UK but worldwide. He's been to prison twice. He's been under house arrest for nearly a year. We're going to wish Robert a very happy birthday today from the UK column, and of course all of his supporters. While we're thinking of Robert enjoying his freedom, albeit gagged for life, let's remind ourselves that Melanie Shaw, who was threatened, those who tried to help her was threatened. Melanie Shaw, Beechwood child abuse victim, is still sitting in a profit-making Sodexo prison in Peterborough, England. So there we are. I'm almost lost for words again, Mike, actually, when you consider the fact that somebody who has suffered horrific abuse as a child and in the care system, what does David Cameron and Theresa May, what do? They put this poor lady in prison. It's horrific. And of course, money is at the back of it.
Indeed it is. So here we've got the Daily Telegraph. This is from a few days ago, but because I wasn't on the programme, we kept it for today. This is the Bank for International Settlements warning that low interest rates, that there's a risk of a backlash as effects spill over into the real economy, the Telegraph reporting. So what's really going on here? Well, the Bank for International Settlements, of course, is the central banker's bank, and they aren't really defining a trend that they're witnessing. They're defining what they intend. And so they're highlighting that $2.4 trillion of long-term global sovereign debt now trading at negative yields. And it's quite an interesting situation because, of course, this is part of the reason why the quantitative easing situation in the Eurozone is failing, because actually it's illegal for the European Central Bank to buy up sovereign debt which is in negative yield. I think they're breaking the law by doing it in any case, but anyway, that's another subject. Telegraph here also warning about the bonds markets, and they're saying that the consequences should be watched closely, as the repercussions are going to be significant, because they're pointing out that, of course, low bank profits and also the effects on savers' deposits are going to have an impact on people's attitudes, and perhaps we're going to see people out on the streets. Well, in the meantime, then the Bank of England has released its inflation report. That's actually going back a few days, actually a month, but as you can see, it's a pretty well-designed front page there. They well identified and so on. But in this, they're pointing out that they're worried that people and businesses are going to revert to cash as a result of what's going on with low interest rates and inflation. And so the central banks, well, are they worried, or are they engineering this social collapse and the likelihood of people out on the streets as a result? What do you think?
I think it's all engineered, Mike. They know full well what's going on, and of course we've seen the crime and corruption and fraud in the international banking system. And there's been some talk about Ukraine recently and what's been going on there. And of course, a big pull by the bankers in the European Union to cause trouble in Ukraine.
Yeah.
Well, apologies to our guest. Of course, David Scott is due to come on with us today. And David, I'm very sorry. I should have mentioned you at the beginning of the programme. But just to check everything's working, are you there? Would you like a quick comment on the financial aspects that Mike's just brought up?
Yes, I'm here. I hope you can hear me okay.
Yep, it's fine.
War on cash has been going on for some time. We have smaller and smaller banknotes are available now. I think the biggest note that Bank of England issues is a £50 note, is that correct? You can still get £100 notes in Scotland, but there used to be larger denomination notes when obviously a pound was worth more in terms of buying power. They're gone. So it's a bit of a war on cash. But if you've ever tried taking large amounts of cash out of a bank, if you get the opportunity, you should do it because they really hate it. They're very curious as to what you're going to do with it. It means they can't then lend it out while you think you've got it on deposit. They can't inflate the currency, and they really don't like it at all. And it's quite entertaining.
Well, I know that one is true, David, because I've tried to do it myself, and the young girl behind the desk asked me what the money was for in front of everybody else in the queue. I thought for a bit, and I said to her, "What do you think it's for?" She said, "Well, it could be for anything." And I said, "Well, that's correct." And we then discussed caravans and carpets and holidays until finally I got her to select one for me. There we are.
I told the local bank I was stuffing a pillow. They asked me that question.
Okay, I'll think about that one. Well, serious stuff. Money is serious. We know the government's making profit off child abuse victims who are in prison. Let's have a look at what's happening on the subject of child abuse. Chad has broken a story that Ashfield MP and hopeful parliamentary candidate Jason Zadrozny has been arrested over historic child sex abuse claims, which he utterly denies. He's a Lib Dem, served on the Ashfield District Council and Nottinghamshire County Council, and he had planned to stand, but he was arrested apparently over allegations of buggery and gross indecency with a male under 16, and the offences, all the offences are alleged to have been committed against one victim. So obviously he's been arrested, something's going on, he's denying everything, but very interesting. This is background of Nottingham, and of course we've recently had Mickey Summers talking about the fact that Nottingham City Council simply does not want to know about the realities of the abuse of youngsters. Meanwhile, we've been talking a lot about bailiffs. This was a headline that came up a couple of days ago, we thought was particularly interesting, from the Mirror, where it's pointing out that, well, it's saying 1.5 million children have experienced, really, parents who've been targeted by bailiffs. And a particularly apt picture here of an axe being taken to a door. But of course, this is the reality of Britain's bailiffs companies and how terrifying that must be for a young child in the house. And as we've showed on the UK Column News earlier this week, JBW Bailiffs simply boasts that it works for the government. Well, let's have a look at what our police officers, senior police officers, are up to. And we just like to bring people back to this story here. This was MP Rob Wilson, who was in the press, claiming that when he tried to unveil child abuse, he was actually threatened by Thames Valley Police top officer Sarah Thornton. Well, we had great interest in that. Let's have a look at the OCVC story that the UK column unfolded. We reported abuse at the column we reported abuse at OCVC several years ago in the column, and within 24 hours this lady had threatened us, called to threaten legal action if we didn't take down material. Anne Wilstead, who was the then head of marketing. But basically the gentleman concerned, who was an Asian, made all the correct reports to Oxford and Cherwell Valley College. However, they were working with a common purpose between Joanna Simmons, this Chief Executive of Oxford, Sally Dicketts, the head of OCV, and Sarah Thornton, the Chief Constable of Thames Valley Police. When the reports were made, they consulted with the Oxfordshire Safeguarding Board, who includes, amongst others, Thames Valley Police. And the net result is this man was employed to do an independent report. His name was Ray Tregear. He has no experience, qualifications or background in writing sensitive reports on child abuse. But nevertheless, his report was submitted not only to the college, but also to the Safeguarding Board and Thames Valley Police under Sarah Thornton. But we now know, oh dear, Thames Valley Police are claiming that they've actually lost or indeed hidden that child abuse report. And so we say, why? What is it doing? Well, it's protecting white paedophiles. Let's have a look at the information request that's now been sent in order to try and get that report out of the police. This is an open email sent by a gentleman called Martin Brighton, and he says, is Thames Valley Police still covering up child abuse? It's an open letter to Thames Valley Police. And then it goes through the fact that the report from Ray Tregear was asked for from the police. And down at the bottom, we see the police reply. They say that their inquiries have not uncovered the report that you quote, nor any mention of it, and therefore where it might be held, or indeed if it's held at all. Now, the evidence is there, irrefutable evidence that the report was provided to Thames Valley Police, so that report is has been lost, or indeed is being deliberately hidden to protect child abusers. So let's come back to Mr. Wilson. We sent him an email to say we're interested in the press article, and we forwarded him certain of our articles talking about Thames Valley Police and a cover-up. And what was the result? Silence. No reply from Mr. Rob Wilson. Make of that what you will. Well, what has UK Column and the British Constitution Group been up to? We're pushing out material from the British Constitution Group conference. The grand jury, very important, with abuse from child abuse with reports from child abuse victims. You can get all of the conferences now. All of the conference videos from the British Constitution Group website. And we're also saying that we've got some recommended viewing, and here are the dates, here are the times that these particular videos will be appearing. You can pause this after the news in order to see exactly what's going to happen there. And this enables you to actually decide when you want to view some of our material. And we'll give you a reminder, UK Column also carrying information to do with videos. So if you haven't been on the site recently, please do. And here you can come and watch what's going on. We're also pumping out information for MP3 and podcasts. And we're also covering here the audios, and just to highlight where that information is. So if you're not too sure how much information we're putting out, it's much more than most people think, and we're going to do our best to advertise what's happening. And before we move on to our guest, David Scott, I'd just like to say a big thank you to Russia Today that has asked UK Column to support their news broadcast. And we did a short interview with them yesterday, and we hope to do more. So the subject was the Falkland Islands, and of course David Cameron's total betrayal of the British Armed Forces and indeed the Falkland Islanders themselves. Well, David Scott, let's bring you back in, and I'll just bring up on screen, this is a photograph of a meeting which took place in Glasgow. You say this is a very important meeting. Tell us a bit about it.
This is one of a series of meetings that are being run by a campaign called No to Name Person. And they have been putting forward the judicial challenge to the named person state guardian legislation in Scotland. And they are going around Scotland holding public meetings to inform people. Still, most people have never heard of the named person legislation. It was not exactly well publicised when it came through Parliament. It was tacked into part of a much larger bill. There wasn't a great deal of discussion regarding it, and there certainly were a few public announcements. So most of the public are still pretty ignorant on the matter, but they are shocked when they find out what's coming down the road for them. this meeting was noticeable because, like all the other meetings, they're getting larger and larger as time goes on, and we're seeing more professionals, people from senior people from healthcare and teachers in particular are very concerned about what it's going to mean for them personally as parents and also professionally.
Right. Well, thank you for that. I've got another web article here which is talking about guardians, and tell us a bit about this one. It's a report from parents who are saying that something happened at school with their 13-year-old.
Yes, this gives you an idea of the rage that's starting to build in Scotland about this. I mean, people, when they find out, are livid. This woman, she had been informed that her daughter, who's 13, S1 at an Aberdeen secondary school, was taken in for... she was given an appointment with the nurse and taken in for a little chat. So the little chat included questions like, who do you live with? Do you get on with your sister? Where do your other siblings live? Do they live nearby? Do your parents work? What jobs do they do? Do you have any pets? How many pets do you have? Do you sleep well? When the girl said, yes, she sleeps well, the nurse, who was not the school nurse, this was a special nurse brought in for this, said, oh, no bedwetting then. She then started to ask her about menstruation and who she talks to in her family about this. She asked, do you feel loved and cared for? Are you listened to? Do you have a good relationship with your parents? So these are the questions that are coming from the named person legislation. These are the questions that our school children, our children, are being asked by anonymous state functionaries. The mother was told that she had in fact consented to this investigation, even though she'd no idea she'd consented. They were claiming some consent to a general program called the CORE program had given permission for this. And they then tried to justify it in terms of Shinari and Gurfek and all the alphabet soup of ideas that underpin it. She concludes, I was so angry I could barely speak, but I asked for a copy of the notes that had been taken and the boxes ticked during my daughter's little chat. Oh, that's confidential, replied the nurse. We have to respect your daughter's confidentiality. Daughter's 13. She says, this is not over by any means. I will obtain a copy of these notes and intend to ensure that my child is never subjected to this again. Wake up, Scotland, and get rid of these Nazis, because that's what they are, before they destroy our country and our children. That's actually quite typical of how people react when they find out what this is really about. There's going to be a lot of anger over this.
David, that's an extremely worrying story. I'm going to say what's more worrying is, of course, that the Scottish government has brought in this type of legislation without people really being awake to what's going on. It's been drifted in, and now once it's starting to act on the ground, people actually realise how dangerous it is. And just before I give pass back to you, to say, well, of course, here in England, we don't have this scheme yet. I personally believe that the widespread exposure now of the extent of paedophilia is to help drive a similar legislation. That's just my personal assessment. But of course, what we do already have is the multi-agency public protection arrangement, MAPA, which means that any information of this sort of nature around children is shared across multiple agencies. And yes, you're right, the parents are blocked. How do you see it going forward? Are people in Scotland going to challenge this?
Yeah, well, let's just start with England. I think that the experience in Scotland, where they try to bring it in quietly but through legislative means, has not actually gone well. That because there is an act, because at least some people noticed, there is opposition building in Scotland. I think what you'll find in England is they won't even be as clear as that. It will come in under the radar, it will come in as a policy statement, and you won't have any point where anyone votes for it or it's actually put into formal legislation. MAPA is essentially the same idea. And all the stuff that's happening in Scotland was originally generated by moves from the Blair government, the UK-wide Blair government. So it didn't actually originate in Scotland. It originated with the UN if you go far enough back, but it's coming via the Blair government. GIRFEC, which is getting it right for every child. In England, the equivalent is, well, it's not No Child Left Behind, but it's some other.
Every Child Matters, I think.
Every Child Matters, that's it, yes. So you will see the same things in England. In Scotland, we are seeing, as I say, there's a lot of rage. I mean, people are, when they find out, they're livid. In the Glasgow meeting, we had one chap who's very senior in the health sector, maybe a senior manager in the NHS. He was asking, well, what does civil disobedience look like in this? And people are talking about that. They're talking about how to gum up the system, how to fight it. So I don't think that the opposition to this is going away. It's going to build and build and build. And this is before it's fully implemented. As this nonsense, you have to understand where it's coming from. They've changed the definition of what they're trying to achieve. It's not welfare, which has some sort of legal meaning. It's well-being, and well-being is everything. You know, it's how are you in yourself? How do you feel? Essentially, are you happy? They actually left the word happy out of the Shinari safe, nurtured, etc. acronym. But essentially, they're trying to legislate for the internal emotional happiness of every child in Scotland. Now, if that's not totalitarian, I don't know what is. It's also doomed to failure. It's a nonsense of a piece of legislation. When they try and introduce this in detail, it's going to throw up horror story after horror story. It's going to be a very, very long suicide note for the Nationalist government. But there'll be a lot of people harmed before it's eventually consigned to the dustbin.
David, thank you for that. We're a little bit tight for time at the moment, so I'll just bring up these other items that you were interested in. But just a quick comment on each, if you will, please. We've got the Diary of Injustice in Scotland, and this article is indicating that top judge Lord Gill is sort of blocking people having a look at the affairs of judges. Is that correct?
Yes, it appears that Lord Gill's move towards a register of interests has in fact been window dressing, that there's never been any intention to have a register of interests, but we're just trying to do PR spin and deflect the criticism. Lord Gill is coming under serious pressure over this because it's... I hear a very strange sound. I don't know if you do. I beg your pardon about that. Because there is no transparency and it's becoming increasingly ridiculous.
Okay. Right, and then you've been asking some questions about transcripts from court and the companies doing them. And this is a letter that you've got back. The purpose of this, of course, is we don't really know who produces transcripts from courts.
Yes, this is an ongoing investigation to do with how transcripts are done in Scotland, and it's recently changed. You see that the people now in charge of it are Merrill Legal Services, which is a large international outfit. So there'll be more on that to come. We're spending about £100,000 worth of government money a year recording what goes on in courts. But how that is then processed and whether the results are in fact accurate are very interesting questions, and that's an ongoing investigation.
Okay. Well, of course, if we need something to distract the public's attention while all of this devious politicking goes on, the attack on our children, nothing better than war.
Indeed. So RT here reporting the continuing NATO drills on Russia's borders. In this case, 4 A-10 Thunderbolt attack planes taking part in war games in Poland. And in fact, Poland now expecting 10,000 NATO forces at drills during this year. Moscow saying that the build-up at Russia's borders is going to have a negative long-term impact. What can we say about this? The Polish defense minister saying we're striving for it. He's talking about more NATO involvement in Poland. We're striving for it and we're talking about it. We're preparing the ground for a constant presence. So they're absolutely determined to have permanent US and NATO bases in Poland. Same kind of thing going on in Lithuania and other places. And Russia pointing out that the French frigate Lafayette moved into the Black Sea this week. They're visiting Odessa and getting involved in joint training, I suppose, with the Ukrainian Navy. I don't know if you've got any comment on that. What about this particular boat and whether
it's just a frigate is the answer.
Well,
it's just a frigate.
Whether the Ukrainians are going to get any benefit from having a French presence or not? No. Okay, we'll move on. And Assad continues to make very interesting comments. This time he's speaking to RIA Novosti, reported here by RT, and really saying US, UK, France want to weaken Russia by turning Ukraine and Syria into puppet states. And he's saying there is a connection between the Syrian crisis and what's happening in Ukraine. Firstly, because both countries are important to Russia. Secondly, because there's a goal in both cases to weaken Russia and create puppet states. They want to turn us into puppets. I don't think that the West has a political solution. It does not want one. When I say the West, I'm primarily referring to the US, France, and the UK. Other countries are secondary. So he's being quite outspoken. And of course, we can't discuss war without discussing what's begun yesterday in Yemen. And Patrick Henningsen here really pointing out that he had warned about this as far back as January, that it was only a matter of time before a full-blown conflict would break out in Yemen. And he's saying that yesterday we saw Saudi Arabian troops massing along the Yemeni border, and of course that they and other, they've created a coalition, haven't they, of Arabic states, and they are attempting to oust some of the what is being described as rebellion that's going on in Yemen. And really, Patrick here pointing out that this is absolutely against international law. Again, we invade another country that hasn't attacked us. The US is involved in this action. And there just seems to be this massive continuing drive to get involved in regime change in countries that where we have really no business being involved.
Absolutely. And if people want more, then our advice is, if you want more war, vote Conservative. And what better man to vote for than David Cameron? Note he's already talking about a coalition. So we say that the political result of the May elections is already decided. It will be a rainbow coalition of many parties. And what's the real danger? That will be a one-party state. And luckily, we've got people picking up on this. Peter Hitchens, have a look at this blog article, Terms of Endearment and What Happened to the Vegetables. This is a serious article, and it's saying, why are we talking about electing prime ministers? Because there's nothing in our constitution about that at all. There's a lie being told to the public. Well, what better people to tell a lie than these two?
Well, they had their debate last night. I didn't watch it, couldn't be bothered, wasn't interested in it. But it was really the poll results, which actually are quite interesting. Unsurprisingly, Conservative and Labour, absolutely. This is a poll of polls. So basically what the BBC has done here is they've taken the results from all the other polls and mashed them all together and showing that Conservative and Labour, as you would expect, on exactly the same percentage in terms of likely outcome. UKIP in third place. The Liberal Democrats absolutely being decimated with 8%. Just to put that in context, they had 23% of the vote at the 2010 election. So the Liberal Democrats have not come out smelling of roses on this one, and UKIP in third place. Clearly, there's going to be a coalition,
rainbow coalition, a one-party government destined on war, violence, and mutilation overseas.
Yes. And finally, this is the British Social Attitudes Survey, and this is put together by NatSen Social Research. It says it's Britain's largest independent social research agency, and they've published their annual British Social Attitudes Survey. Covers all kinds of stuff with regard to what people's attitudes to the last 5 years of government are, to the whole range of things. But the Times decided to pick up on people's attitudes to the death penalty out of this research, and they're saying that it has support for the death penalty has fallen below 50% for the first time, They're saying that 48% of people now back the death penalty for some crimes, and that's down from 54% in 2013, and that's down from 74% in 1986. They're saying, of course, that UKIP supporters are more likely to support the death penalty, with 75% in favour. But unfortunately, they don't seem to have asked about the death penalty with respect to politicians, and maybe that may have skewed the result somewhat.
Well, certainly, and of course the death penalty for treason, because as we watch what's unfolding in our country, whether it is the selling off of public infrastructure, or it's the abuse of children, or it's people in prison for profit, or it's the destruction of our armed forces, what we are witnessing is treason. That treason is coming out of men and women in Westminster. Death penalty, well, maybe. We'll consider that over the weekend. That's the end of today's news. David, thank you very much for joining us from north of the border. If you get a spare moment this afternoon, perhaps you go out there and give my condolences to those poor sheep, and we'll see whether we can set up some form of conference with the beavers and squirrels. I think we get the global warming sorted out. Okay, thanks for joining us. We'll be back same time on Monday.
Bye-bye.